Market sequencing is actually what makes a company live or die. Chainalysis is the blockchain intelligence company that provides data, technology, and services to government agencies that are looking into cryptocurrency and illicit activity. We became the predominant way that all governments around the world really investigate cryptocurrency-related crime. And their problem was, we're coming across Bitcoin in these investigations. We have no way to follow them. I'd meet members of the government at Starbucks because they wouldn't let me into a government building. Now, the majority of our clients by number are actually in the private sector. I had people falling off chairs in conference rooms as we showed them what we could do.
And this was not your first idea or first company?
I started a business in my bedroom in Oxford, and I have been obsessed with the same idea for the last 12 years, and nothing's changed. But you could feel if you're solving a big enough problem for someone through their reactions to things.
Jonathan, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for coming out. You are the co-founder and now CEO of a company called Chainalysis, which is valued at $4 billion. Incredible company. Can you tell me a little bit more about, I always like to know more about the people, so a little bit more about your early journey and then what the company does.
Yeah, well, great to be here and awesome to be sitting in DC doing this. And there's a lot of exciting stuff happening in DC around crypto. And so Chainalysis is the blockchain intelligence company that provides data, technology, and services to government agencies that are looking into cryptocurrency and illicit activity, as well as everyone in the private industry that's putting transactions onto the blockchain. So if those are cryptocurrency exchanges, wallets, now fintechs and banks, really helping everyone get their best information about what's happening on the blockchain to make risk decisions, security decisions, fraud decisions, investigation decisions, empowering the entire industry to become a lot safer and a lot more trusted. We've been going for 10 years, and so I kind of don't think about life that much before Chainalysis, but before Chainalysis, I'm originally from the UK and grew up as an economist that was looking at environmental economics of all things, and sort of fell into crypto in my postgrad at Oxford, and really wrote some of the earliest game theory work about Bitcoin at the time. And so really that was what piqued my interest in really building the company that understands how and why people are actually using cryptocurrency.
And this was not your first idea or first company?
Yeah, I mean, I started a business in my bedroom in Oxford, and I have been obsessed with the same idea for the last 12 years, and nothing's changed. And here I am in 2025, still trying to understand how and why people are using cryptocurrency. It just turns out that the environment has changed a lot, and the scale of things and the complexity of things have changed dramatically. And now cryptocurrency is embedded into global finance and into import, export, and into payments and other things. And when I started along this journey in 2012, 2013, there was really sort of not that much happening apart from people investing in some experimental stuff in Bitcoin. And so what's really been important to me has been, understanding the economics behind how and why people use cryptocurrencies. And then we developed the business of Chainalysis, which really first started with all the public sector use cases, and then ultimately, moved over to the private sector and helping them with security, with fraud prevention and AML compliance.
And your first customer ended up being the government, which is how you have an office in DC and you end up spending a lot of time here. Is that right?
Yeah. So our real market sequencing was that we became the predominant way that all governments around the world really investigate cryptocurrency-related crime. And today, that represents pretty much every crime type that you could imagine. The government needs tools to be able to identify criminal activity and be able to prosecute. And so, that's been a really important part of our business. But now the majority of our clients by number are actually in the private sector. And so, banks entering the space, fintechs, stablecoin companies, developers in DeFi, and really everyone in the industry who wants to be able to understand the intelligence from the blockchain.
Tell me a little bit more about yourself. How did, where in UK, did you grow up in Oxford or did you grow up somewhere else? Were your parents economists? How did you, get into pursuing your postgrad there at Oxford? Like, always curious about what, how people pick up their interests. And
I think that the origin story for me on sort of what I'm doing today is sort of fairly, I would say, fairly normal in the sense that like I grew up, I had immigrant parents in the UK. I grew up in London. They come from South Africa, and there's like a long history of South African entrepreneurialism that came through sort of the dinner table and the food that we ate and like the bloodstream. I think that there is, I was surrounded by some entrepreneurs and some business leaders like growing up that were inspiring for sure. And I think that many of them I actually still speak to now that I actually have real problems to talk to them about. And I think that environment gave me sort of a sense of entrepreneurialism, but I wasn't always interested in entrepreneurialism per se. I then sort of was good at school and good at maths in particular, and I sort of found that I was interested in maths, but not so much that it disconnected with humans. And so economics was my sort of way of trying to understand human behavior through a fairly mathematical lens. And so that sort of led me down a path to do economics. I got rejected from Cambridge to do economics. And so that was my first sort of chip on my shoulder of, I was always told that I was, destined to do that. And I just completely, failed at an interview. That gave me like a good chip on my shoulder that I had something to prove. But I went to Bristol. I had like a really great experience in understanding, I think, a little bit more about broader society than I would have done just studying text at Oxford. And so I managed to, I started the Bristol Social Enterprise Conference. So I was already like interested in both the sort of social good aspects of what entrepreneurialism can bring, but also like entrepreneurialism in general. And so I then needed to solve the chip on my shoulder from not getting into Cambridge. And so applied to Oxford for postgrad. And I wasn't done with the sort of level of study that I wanted to do. And so going to Oxford for postgrad was about getting like a very robust education and challenging myself intellectually. And I think that it's a very rigorous course. It's like a very hard mathematical journey. And I realized that I'm actually not that good at maths at Oxford. And so it was clear to me that once I had discovered and come across crypto, I was interested in either two paths. There was a path of mine which was, go to the Oxford Internet Institute, study what are the design principles of cryptocurrencies and how do you optimally design new crypto assets for new use cases. And that was going to be sort of one pursuit. And the other was going to be, an entrepreneurial path. And I had already started a business in my bedroom at Oxford, categorizing economic data to do with Bitcoin. And so I was already going down the entrepreneurial path. And I, much to my parents' sort of dismay, I decided to not pursue getting a job after doing my postgrad and jump first into building a company. And that wasn't actually Chainalysis. That was a company called Chronometrics. And I got the wrong problem. Like I got the right idea, but I was targeting it at the wrong people. And so I think that the insight is that like now today at Chainalysis, we actually power some of the decisions that I wanted to power when I first started the company, which was I want people to understand really for economic reasons, how and why people use cryptocurrency. And we spent the first decade powering and fighting illicit activity in cryptocurrency and solving the trust problem that there is in the industry. And so that's really been my entrepreneurial journey, if you will, with a little bit of my personal background.
Super fascinating. What have you learned about choosing what to work on from that first startup, which didn't work out?
I think that when you think about your overall sort of insight, it's stayed the same for me if you think about it. Like, I'm still obsessed with the same problem, which is we need to know the most about how and why people use crypto.
The execution changes.
The market sequencing is actually what makes a company live or die. So,
right.
And you can get that fundamentally wrong. And so we came into the market, and initially our idea was that the private sector, the exchanges, the businesses that were operating in crypto needed to understand this information the most so that they could understand what their customers were doing with cryptocurrency when they left the platform or just before they came to their platform.
So these would be exchanges at the time?
Exchanges at the time. Yeah. This would be the Bitstamps of the world, the Krakens
right.
of the world. Those businesses needed to understand what their customers were doing just before they came to the platform or just after they left. And we thought that that was going to be a great business. The reality was that the public sector had a much more acute problem. And their problem was, we're coming across Bitcoin in these investigations. We have no way to follow the money. And it's a complete brick wall. And we need some way to get over it. And when we first came across that problem, I had never even spoken to anyone in law enforcement. Like, I don't think I'd even had a moment talking to a police officer in my life.
I mean, most people don't.
Yeah, right. Like,
most people don't think about it either.
Don't think about it.
Yeah.
And also, like, everyone in the business community tells you, like, doing business with the government sucks. And so the thing about it is that we realized that the problem...
Was this still back in the UK, or had you moved to the US?
I was moving back and forth between I was still living in the UK, but I was coming back and forth to the US. And, I'd meet members of the government at Starbucks because they wouldn't let me into a government building or didn't want to fill out the paperwork for a UK citizen to come to a government building.
I feel that.
Yeah. And look, like, Starbucks is the satellite office of every government agency that there is. So,
good to know. Good to know for the audience as well who are selling to the government.
Yeah, no, if they invite you to Starbucks, like, you're in a good place. Like, you're all good. And so the problem for the government was much more acute than for the businesses at the time, because there wasn't regulatory clarity on the obligations of those businesses. And so, we realized pretty quick that we actually needed to sequence the market, which is, first we need to make sure that the government has all the tools that they need, and we'll come back for the industry later. And once we've done the industry, then we'll go back to the government, and then we'll go back to the industry, and now we'll go into traditional financial institutions. And so, like, sequencing that market well and defining what success looks like in each of those phases of the market is actually really important for a business that is going into a brand new market. I would say, like, if you're in a much more well-established market, let's take, databases. You still should sequence out, like, when you think you're going to the Fortune 500 and how you think about, like, those client profiles, but you'll actually have, like, a much more sort of known map about what makes sense in those markets to go after. Like, you probably need to start down market and move up market over time, and you probably need to start off on the west coast of the United States and then move to the east coast of the United States. And, like, that's, like, roughly how people think about sequencing. But for us, like we were a category creation business. And so like there was no playbook. It wasn't obvious that the government would be a big enough market for us. It wasn't obvious that it would take us 4 years to come back for the private sector. And so the critical thing that we now see with perfect hindsight that we made good decisions about were, let's start in the government. Let's make sure that they have the tools that they need. Then let's move to the private sector as regulations become clearer. And then we can go back and we can build out more solutions. And now I'm in a completely different phase of the market, moving even into prevention, which is like a new thing for us. And so that market sequencing is a really important thing to write down and think about as you start an entrepreneurial journey, is what phases of the market are we in and how do we measure success of that?
You brought up market sequencing a lot there. Do you follow interest? Like, what would your advice on looking at market sequencing?
I think that some of this has to do with, product market fit type analysis that people talk about. I would say that we had, for our product, and I think that people should think about this the same way, which is like, I had the government literally like pulling my arm, and like I had people falling off chairs in conference rooms as we showed them what we could do. And that made it obvious that this had to be the first area of focus for us. And to be completely honest, like we didn't know how big economically that opportunity was. And so like, I don't think people should be like too concerned about what are the dollars that you generate today, but you could feel if you're solving a big enough problem for someone through their like reactions to things. If someone cries like in a room where you've shown them a product, like that's a great place to be. And like you want to continue going down that path.
Well, while we're talking about decision making, you were previously in a chief strategy officer role. How did, amongst co-founders, you guys decided that who should take up the CEO role and what role you should take on eventually? And we were talking about Oren's, I think, blog post on the 4 types of decision makers. One being micro thinker, short-term thinker, long-term thinker, big thinker. And I think the strategy part he puts under the long-term thinker category, which is weeks to months to make a decision, but you have to make the right, really impactful decisions that have like asymmetric returns for the company. So would you look at that as a correct categorization of the strategy role? And then how did you choose to be in that?
I think sometimes I think that the thing is that there are definitely those types of different decisions, and there are definitely roles and people that want to be doing long studies to figure out what the right answers for things are. I would say even my style when I was chief strategy officer was a little bit more, I would make a fairly quick decision about a market that we wanted to enter. So for example, I said that, we built 2 very successful applications at Chainalysis. One was for investigations, one was for compliance. And we locked up all of our insights about what's happening on the blockchain into those 2 applications. It didn't take me long to come up with the hypothesis that we needed to actually open up access to our insights to our customers much more broadly than those 2 applications. Like we had sort of, built 2 very specific workflow products. And I'd long had this idea that we needed to build a data platform and allow customers to more directly interact with our data to get insights into whatever workflow that they wanted to be able to access. So I could make that decision fairly quickly. And then it's more about like the strategy role for me was more about like, how do we go and execute against it? Do we need to go buy a company? Do we need to go build it? Like, what does the investment profile look like? And how do we build that plan and execute against it? So I always was probably more in, I would say, the short decision type territory. And I would say that for a founder of the company, at least in my feeling as a founder of the company, like this business runs in my bones. Right. Like decisions for me aren't taxing. Like I can make fairly quick decisions about what we should be doing. And I think that the thing about the strategy role versus the chief executive role is that you get a lot more immediate feedback when you're in the chief executive role, because you're making the types of decisions you're making have like immediate impact. And the strategy role was actually kind of difficult for me because I actually transitioned into it from running go-to-market. And in go-to-market, you have like the dopamine hit of selling deals every day, being at the negotiating table, closing deals, and running teams in the market that are having immediate impact, and transitioning to, I made a decision today, but the payout is going to take 3 years and we don't actually know whether this is the right decision, is like a very...
It's like being a venture capitalist.
Yeah, no, exactly. And very much so. And you can only take certain number of bets, and you need to continue convincing the company that these are the right bets, even though they're not showing results today, or maybe you miss a quarter, or maybe you miss two. Like that, those things are, or you pivot the startup that you bought into building something completely different than what they originally did. And so I think that the thing for me about decisions and their implications are that some decisions have like a very fast turnaround and you can feel really good about making them. And some are those that take a really long time. And so I spend my time today making some things that make me feel great at the end of the day, being like, I just achieved a lot of things and we made a bunch of decisions. And then I've got like a whole bunch of bets that are 3 to 5 years in the making, right? And I get to, in the chief executive role, I get a lot of fulfillment out of both of those things. And it's nice to have like a blend. I think that being in a chief strategy role for me was also like frustrating at times, that I wasn't feeling fulfilled, even though I felt like I was having high impact of the company. The payback periods were just too long on some of those decisions. But I think that the way that you divide up roles and responsibilities, to get back to your original question, I think was very natural for us at the beginning of the company. My co-founder, Michael, who was the CEO, has both technical aptitude and business acumen. And so made a lot of sense in the early days of the company, and made a lot of good decisions around architecture as well as product, and had like really good intuition around those things. And our third co-founder, Jan, was clearly the technical co-founder, and loved building, loved innovating, loved creating product. And so it made sense that I spent most of my time in market with customers, and eventually built our go-to-market engine and did those things. And then, once you get much, much later, then things change. And Jan left to go work on land and farm cows. And Michael left the business in December and is figuring out what he wants to do.
What was an early sort of transformational experience you think you had that gave you the entrepreneurial bug?
I think that there was a deep frustration that I had as a consultant. And I was a consultant I'll give you two examples where I felt particularly frustrated, which was I was actually a consultant to Western Union when I was really early in crypto, and I got like a very lucky break to help the executive team at Western Union think about cryptocurrency in 2013. And if you think about it, I had all these ideas about how Western Union could actually be the main on-ramp and off-ramp into the crypto economy. And suffice it to say, that's not what happened with Western Union over the last decade, but maybe changing today, but it's now 12 years later. But that experience to me was interesting, which is that sitting, doing deep research, coming up with ideas, suggesting things doesn't cut it for me. Doesn't give me the amount of energy that I have as a person is high, and I want to get more out of the thing that I'm doing than what I put into it. And so that's something that I felt as a consultant. And the second experience as a consultant, I did an internship at a company called Vivid Economics, which was in climate change. And really, we did an enormous amount of work on border carbon adjustments, where importing goods that are carbon intensive into economies where you have a carbon tax is going to be necessary. And we did just enormous amounts of work on it. And at the end of the day, the political will is just absolutely not there to do anything of the sort. And, I was the level of effort that I put into what I do and the amount of drive that I have is just so much higher than giving advice. And I realized at that moment that I actually needed to do my own thing. And I really feel like in an entrepreneurial journey, if you come with the right attitude and you put in, if I put in 100 hours of work or whatever, I get so much back from that investment that it makes me feel like I've really done something meaningful with my time.
You mentioned you were leading the go-to-market team in the early days, and you were selling to, what became your biggest customers was the government, and you hadn't even talked to the police in your entire life. What are some insights there about penetrating into government?
Yeah, I think that one of the things is that I didn't even know that our first government customer was an agency that existed. So that's how little I knew about the government. I didn't know that there was an agency called the Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms and Explosives.
Is this in the US?
Yeah, this is in the US. Yeah.
I didn't know that either.
Yeah. So I didn't know, I knew very, very little about the government. And I would say that I know a lot of things now about the federal acquisition rules, and I know a lot about what it takes to do business with the government. But I would say that actually, even in the early days of Chainalysis, I went against a lot of people's advice about how to go through those processes. And our early government customers literally bought Chainalysis on expense credit cards and used emails that didn't have real government affiliation. That's how much they wanted the products. And so once we validated that was the level of commitment and interest on what is happening, you can then go and invest in all the things that you need in order to be able to do business with the federal government, which is actually, you do need to go through a distributor. You do need to make sure that you've got compliance in place. And we did all of those things, ultimately to get that in place. But in the beginning, I think that people get scared that the government is this very scary organization to do business with. And they shy away from the basics, which is that you just need to find people who are really dedicated as your champions to make stuff happen. And
that gives you the confidence.
That gives you the confidence to go to it.
And they become your evangelists. They go back, and it could be a short-term or long-term thing. It may show results in 6 months or 9 months, but you have to sort of work on getting those champions first.
Yeah, and I think that, I mean, look, it's a big investment. There's no question. I mean, if you think about it, like it's one of the hotter enterprise markets to sell into. It has some of the highest sort of information security requirements and slow procurement. But the thing is that actually does mean that you are also sticky. And so if you have the deep enough conviction that this is something that the government needs, and you're seeing those signs from those individuals, I think that it's a great place to do business. The other thing that I would say is that our strategy was, how do you make, and this is particularly important in the government, but also applies into the private sector, is how do you make people's careers? Like, Chainalysis was going to make people's careers. That there were going to be government employees that were early adopters of Chainalysis that then became actually, like, quote unquote, famous in the government for solving this really hard problem of criminal activity in crypto. And there were people who started off literally in the post room at an agency who knew something about crypto, who then would brief the Secretary of Treasury and even the president on issues to do with cryptocurrency. And
those are some incredible stories.
Those are incredible stories. And if you can give those people, if you can understand your role as a entrepreneur and as a technology provider in terms of equipping someone with like actually creating a career opportunity for them, you can understand that like that's a really good way for you to continue to climb up the enterprise and provide value to those customers.
I think that's great advice. In that time, what have you learned about becoming a better storyteller?
I think it's something that, I think there's two things I would say. One is there are people who are naturally better at telling stories than others. And I think that I was very fortunate that I've had some natural capability of that for a long time. I would say, though, it's also an art form that you can hone in and you can practice. And I used an acting coach for communication and storytelling that helps a lot when you're trying to tell a story and practice something. I would say the thing that I find is interesting about storytelling for me personally is that out of those like different decision makers or different profiles of types of leader, I'm more on the intellectual side of things than the emotional side of things. And having the awareness that what your bias is and how you're received and perceived can help you, translate and help make sure that you're not dropping the other side of things. Like, my team today definitely sees me as someone who has like vision and strategy and thinks, very, structured about the market opportunity in front of us. I have, to work on making sure that I'm bringing the emotional side of storytelling to the fore. Like, it's not just about, facts and numbers and being right. Like, that's not what it's about.
Well, can you share a story about evoking emotions?
I think that the emotional side of, I would say, I'll give you a story of like where I did this wrong. Is like maybe a better instrument of how to learn from it. Like, doing it right is not that interesting. I think that we were raising a Series B, and the questions were coming about what is the addressable market for Chainalysis. And my instinct as even a storyteller and as a strategist was, do a bottoms-up analysis of like how we're doing and create a model that takes us to like a realistic revenue number that someone could expect us to hit between the Series B and Series C. That's my rational bias. And it made a lot of sense to me. Like if I imagined myself sitting on the other side of the table being like, oh, here is an entrepreneur who really understands the market, who's like calculated the drivers and like has given me like this beautiful understanding of like how Chainalysis is going to go from like, 15 million in revenue to 80 million in revenue over this period of time. Right. And that was my intuition. And I sat down with our Series A investor, Sarah Tarvel from Benchmark. And I remember presenting her like a bottoms-up plan to get to 80 million in revenue. And she was like, throw it away. Like, no one wants to hear that. Like, that makes no sense. I am so like disappointed at the end. I'm like, but Sarah, like this is the market. Like this is what the dynamics are going to look like. And like, you know what? I was probably right about it. But that didn't matter. That didn't matter. Like what actually mattered was like, did she understand? And it wasn't her that we were pitching, but we were pitching Series B investors. We were getting feedback. Like what is the level of commitment and ambition of these founders? Like that is, and how big will they be able to dream and take this so that people can actually understand.
People get behind the story.
People can get behind it. And like, I want to feel like I'm part of something that could be massive, not like, what is the next route to capital? Like who is the next buyer of this equity story? So I think that is like a good example of where my bias for sort of intellectual and like being correct. And I think that stuff is important, but it's important to know your audience and know when to use that in your like quarterly financial plans or your annual financial plans versus your storytelling in an investor context or even talking to the whole company context and knowing how to flex between those things. And that's something that I learn all the time.
That's a fun story. And I've increasingly also had the same insight that, it's more about the people and the scale of their ambitions and the facts or sort of.
The facts are also important.
I think they're very important, but not in the story.
Not in the story. I think that once someone has been, and this is maybe like what you're getting at, is that in order for me to look at the numbers correctly, like from a optimistic point of view, I need to be hooked by the story.
Yes.
I think that's the other thing that I think is sort of a major insight in terms of my entrepreneurial journey is that even very, very smart people look at numbers differently depending on how emotionally bought into the story they are. And so the whole thing about entrepreneurial journeys is that if you nail the emotional connection that someone has to your mission and to your vision, you then can get them to see numbers differently. And to see that it's not just the next 2 quarters. It's not just the next 4 quarters, but like I'm going to take a 15, 20 quarter view on this story rather than getting too caught up in like, okay, what's going to happen in the next 12 months? Yeah, exactly.
That's a fair point. You mentioned that this was an insight you had when you were going out to raise your Series B. How much funding have you raised so far?
We've raised around $550 million today.
And when you were starting out, did you know you were going to need to raise this much? Or
no, I would say that we had 2 sort of conflicting pieces of information. We knew that this needed to be a venture-backed business because of the scale of the problem that we're tackling and how fast we wanted to move with distribution and addressing a global market. And so we knew we needed capital. I wouldn't say I thought we needed $500 million of capital, although software is costly to produce, as I've learned, at least today. Maybe it'll go down tomorrow. But really, the feedback from VCs in the beginning, because we were in such a niche market, or we were creating a market, was you should just not raise any capital and you should run this organically, and you should be this is a good lifestyle business, effectively. Like, that was feedback from 75 seed investors that we pitched at the time, which, again, like, they couldn't see that this market was going to develop in the way that it did. And, even my Series B model, we've blown through those numbers as a business. And so I think that the initial amount of money that we needed, if you think about like our seed round was $1.6 million, which actually to me is like a good amount of money to raise for a seed round. Like, I know that there's been inflation in the last 10 years, so like you may need a little bit more than that, but I think that it helps having constraints at those points in time. And I genuinely believe that you need enough money as an entrepreneur to take bets and to feel comfortable taking bets. Yeah. But I think that, like, I very much subscribe to the philosophy that having too much money doesn't help you succeed as a business, and it doesn't create the right culture inside the company. And I think being frugal and understanding the cost of making bets and decisions is fundamentally important to the creation of a great company. And so I think that we managed to raise, good amounts of capital when the market was right, but we actually, the best times in the company, and even if you think about Chainalysis today, I'm very adamant that we have to be like very good stewards of capital, and we take a lot of pride in like how we deploy resources. And I think that mindset is helpful at any stage of the journey.
How big is the team now?
Team is roughly 720 people. We are very, very global within that. We have boots on the ground in 30 countries around the world, and we go, and part of what is great about Chainalysis is that we go and localize in the countries that we go into. So we have a Korea office, and we have a Japan office, and we have Singapore, and we have Australia, we have India, we have Dubai, we have Tel Aviv. Like, we go and make sure that we serve those local markets with local talent and like a specific approach, and actually doing that at scale, even at like our scale, is challenging, but is a unique advantage for us in the market.
What we were talking about this before we started recording, but what have you learned about creating a culture and keeping up that culture in a 700 people board?
I think the interesting thing for me about it has been, I obviously was like a key contributor to our culture for the first 10 years of Chainalysis. I think that I told a lot of the stories. I've been in all the rooms. I understand all the context. I was a very visible part and ran big parts of the company. But I know now, 9 months into being CEO, that we had to change a lot of our culture and change the way that decisions were made at Chainalysis and change the way that we show up in the market. And I think that the interesting thing for me was it was one of my biggest surprises as taking over as CEO, is that there needed to be a lot of those changes. And I think that some of the tenets that we maybe didn't have that I thought we had, but we definitely didn't have, was we didn't have like the highest sense of urgency that I expect. And
is it a function of scale? 700 people is like
no, I don't think it's a function of scale. I think that there is I think that at the end of the day, the culture is part and parcel of like the way you reward people versus and how you cultivate leadership. And I think that we at Chainalysis didn't create enough of a culture around accountability, urgency, and agility. Like those were the three things that I sort of put my finger on, where I was like, we operate in a super fast changing environment. Like crypto is one of these markets that is
changes on a quarterly basis,
changes on a weekly basis. It's like we are not in this like, okay, set a very long term like plan vision that doesn't change and adapt. And I realized that we had a culture where we had hired people that weren't ready for some of those things. And I think that, or we hadn't set the clear enough expectation that, I expect people to be really agile in their thinking about what changes in the market mean for changes in our products and changes in our strategy. And I hadn't been explicit about that. And I hadn't been explicit about how I want people to act with urgency on things where we can change things tomorrow. Like just act today and we'll change it tomorrow if it's not the right thing that we should be doing. And I think that the accountability piece, I think we had a culture where we didn't hold other parts of the company accountable in the same way. And this is something that's really hard, and maybe it's a scale problem, but maybe it's just a cultural thing that we are, adjusting and developing at Chainalysis, is that, really it should feel like product and go to market and all of the supporting functions in the company are in something together. Like, and that if we need something from the legal department for a product requirement, we go get it and we hold people accountable to it. And I think that the team accountability at Chainalysis, we didn't have as strong as I thought when I took over as CEO. And so I've made it a pretty high priority for me to keep our culture changing, in particular along these three sort of lines, if you will. Our values are unchanged. Like I don't think we changed sort of our major values, but I think those three tenets are stuff that I sort of diagnosed as being missing in the culture that I thought were there, but actually weren't there.
Ooh, how do you change that culture in an existing 700-person company? Where do you start?
You start really with yourself first, and you have to make sure that you are acting in the way that you say that you're going to act, right? Which is, am I showing up with a sense of urgency every day? I think about myself as very much the ceiling of the level of ambition that we can have on almost any topic. And so I think that it's really hard to set a culture if you're not holding yourself to that standard first and foremost. And I think that then it sort of cascades down from there, which is, how do you make sure that you set the expectations for your leadership team? How do you set the expectations about what they should do for their managers? And how do you set the expectation as 700 people for those managers to even manage those managers, or even the people below them? And I think that I try and communicate a lot with the company. I sometimes fail a little bit, but I think that I try and make sure that I hold myself to the high standard that is expressing those attributes. And I think that in doing so, you foster the culture more broadly. It helps if you can spend time in person with people. So we brought the company together in 3 different locations across the world to be able to try and get this message across. But my big thing is consistency. Like, I think that without consistency, you can't change culture.
What have you learned about hiring executives?
A lot. I would say that the key lessons for me about hiring executives is there oftentimes needs to be like a good balance between whether an executive is someone who's been there, done that, and someone who still has the level of ambition and something to prove. And this is like a really hard thing for companies is, do you need this role to be someone who's actually seen the full movie before it? Like if you're starting at 10 million in ARR and you're going to 100 and you need a revenue leader to be able to do that, do you need someone who's done 10 to 100 before? Or do you want someone who has a chip on their shoulder about being able to do 10 to 100?
Maybe they've done 20 or 30.
Yeah, but haven't hit that milestone and that big. It's a big thing for like a revenue leader to be someone who can do that. And I think that I don't think that there's a hard and fast rule about whether one is better than the other. Like, I think that that's too crude. But I would say like this. If you're finding someone who has the been there, done that, and someone who's had that experience, you need to prioritize your tests of that person all about their motivation and all about like how dedicated they will be to your cause, and try and get like as deep on motivation as possible. For the person who's like clearly super motivated and cares personally and deeds, then you have to test for execution ability. And don't get confused between those two things, because you might be interviewing both profiles at the same time and you think that you're doing the same interview for these two people. But actually what really matters is like for the people who have the experience and who have the proven track record, okay, go reference them, make sure it was them who really did it. But in often cases it will be. The thing that you're most looking for is like the motivation aspects. And for the people that are like completely obsessed about your mission, completely like bought in, like very excited, very much, you've got like a sense that they're really highly motivated people, you do need to test on execution. And I would get them to present things, and I would get them to tactically roll up their sleeves and actually do stuff. Whereas like,
is it through like a project?
I think it really depends on the role, but like I think that, and it depends on the stage. But I think that for even if you're interviewing someone who's like more of an up and comer inside your organization to maybe join the executive suite or take on a leadership role, like I think that getting them to present, getting them to deliver a plan, getting them to understand it is like a critical thing that matters.
What's your strategy, or what was your strategy in the early days when you probably didn't have the money or resources for the more experienced talent, but you had to just probably filter for only ambition and motivation, and then skills you're either training for or like hoping they have the urgency to figure it out. How do you evaluate those types in the early days?
I think in the early days, we still always looked for someone who had a relevant piece of experience. I mean, I think that you're always trying to figure out, and I made this mistake, which is, I sort of squinted to try and make sure that someone had like a good bit of experience for us. And like a good example is that selling enterprise software is a very particular type of sales motion. It requires a certain type of infrastructure to be able to go and do that. Selling consumer or selling hardware is not the same process, not the same motion as those things. And so like in the early days, I told myself
they're not necessarily transferable skills.
They're not transferable skills. So I in the early days, I told myself some pretty I taught myself some pretty good lessons about like, hey, I'm going to always like I'm going to be optimistic because it's in my DNA, but it's also necessary when you don't have the money to pay for top talent and you can't attract people out of those things. And I think that the way that I would do it is that I continue to do this today is, I try and say, what is the core motivation of the person that is coming on board? Like, how motivated are they because we are a fast growing enterprise software company that could be worth, X billion one day? Like that's quite fleeting. Like like especially in crypto, market turns, we go through a depression, like those people aren't going to stay around. So I think that my overall guidance for someone who's starting out is like, look for some form of relevant experience and make sure that it's relevant to you. And then the second thing is that get to the core of their motivation. Like, I love someone who's got something to prove. Like, I think that, someone who is going to tell you that they are like in this because they tried it before and didn't succeed is that's a great sentence that like I want to hear, where someone's like, this is the time that I actually get to take that top job and like make a big impact.
What are your favorite questions to test for motivation?
I'm very upfront. I say like, why are we talking? Like, why are we talking? Yeah, what's interesting? And I let them talk, and someone who can come up with a really good answer about like why this is like a really exciting conversation for them to be having is great. And someone who like who stumbles and says like, a recruiter called me, like that's not a good reason for us to have a conversation. So yeah, and I also say like, I'm interested in like, how do you imagine yourself in 5 years?
At what point can the co-founders keep doing the final interviews?
I had an interview yesterday of a candidate.
You still do the final interview?
Okay, so this person is at a VP level, but like, I still will do a final interview, and I said like, absolutely no. No, not every new hire, but like at a VP level, I'll still do probably final interviews for those things, and strategic roles even below that, I will continue to do that. I see it as like a big part of my job. Like, I think that for me, being the chief executive, especially as we set into this new sort of culture, I think that it's critically important for me to be spending time on it. I like interviewing and I like bringing in great talent. I would say for my sins, I'm also somewhat of a LinkedIn stalker, and I end up like, and I wouldn't advise this, but I think it's a good character trait, is that I actually like in another world was like a sourcer like of like candidates. And
interesting.
I have like there are people that I stalk for many years online that I then find roles for inside the company. And some of our best hires are people that I've like been particular companies, particular experiences, particular like.
Do you look for them to leave, or do you look for progression? What are you tracking in that?
A lot of that is progression. Like, I look at like companies that I aspire to be, companies that I'm like completely, think that are, good analogies for Chainalysis in domains that are relevant. And I look for like, who is rising up the ladder at that company. And I look for like the UX designer who became like the head of design, who then became the head of product, who then became like,
how dynamic are they?
Yeah, how dynamic are they? And And at some point you're like, oh, I actually have a role for this person who like started out as an SDR, now runs the enterprise sales team on the East Coast. Can we pull them out to like run a bigger job for us? Like those types of questions. And recruiters should be thinking about it in that way. But like the thing that I've learned is that founders have to like actually, yeah, you have to be a recruiter. Like, and at least like, for example, I teach our recruiters like my process, and then they can go and scale that. Yeah.
No, I get it, because I think you referenced earlier that when we were talking about context switching in long-term and short-term decision making, you have the most context. You've been at the company for 10 years, right? So it's still to date, you're going to have the best, yardstick to measure, which piece of the puzzle fits where and why, right?
Yeah.
Whether that's on a 3 years timeline or a 1 year timeline, whatever that is.
I think that also like people need to know like what inspires me, right? Like that, like what things do I like? What things do I think are important for us? And so I spend time with our recruiters talking about like these companies for these reasons. Like that's something that is so helpful for anyone who's building a team, is like talk about like, hey, these are aspirational companies that we want to be. Okay. We are a defense company. We want to be like Anduril. Okay, well, okay, for these types of, what does Anduril do really well that like we aspire to do? Is it M&A? Is it M&A? Okay. Like that's a really good thing. Like, okay. And then it's like, okay, not all M&A works. And so then like, are we pulling out engineers that came over in this acquisition that no longer like working at Anduril because, the founders got paid and the engineers didn't, or whatever it is. Like, I think that those types of things are stuff that the younger teams should be thinking about. And I think it's a really positive way of thinking too. It's like, hey, we've got things like we're aspirational. Like we have things that we look up to.
How often do you talk to your recruiters?
I actually spend a lot of time with my recruiters. I probably on a weekly basis, I'm definitely talking to at least 1 to 3 recruiters on the team about specific roles that we're trying to fill.
Are all the recruiters internal?
Yeah, mostly. Yeah. And I also get a weekly update even today on roles that I care about and pipeline development because I think it's really important.
What is something you're excited about in the next 20 years? Outside of your current industry. Outside of your current industry.
Like I'm excited. I'm excited about a lot of things. I think it's hard to, not get sucked into like an AI type conversation, but I think that I'm very excited about healthcare. Like I'm very excited about the ability for us to produce drugs to end, different types of disease if you take a 20-year horizon. I'm also very excited about like advancements in fertility for, the world to, be a well-populated place with, the ability for, people to choose to have kids. Like I think that to me is sort of one of the like places outside of work that I am, and I'm very excited about like mental health development that we can, help solve some of the problems that we've created through technology with other technology that helps with mental health issues around our society. I think that those things are kind of some of the most exciting parts of the new technology developments around AI. And so those are the things that I don't spend a ton of time looking into them, but those are the things that I'm pretty excited about.
You mentioned that there's conventional wisdom you get about fundraising, which is usually wrong. What are some things that you were given advice on that you found out not to be true?
I think that there are a few pieces of conventional wisdom that are not always that great. I think that the one that I shared earlier about being able to emotionally connect with the person that you're raising money from is like a really important one, and something that I think is underappreciated. I think that an overappreciated one is that it's a true numbers game, that you have to go and like get all of these people, and you have to see whether it fits with any of those people. I think that a lot of founders go out too hard and go speak to too many people, and in which case you actually also sort of burn your opportunity. And I think it's better to focus in on like a couple of people who you think would be really, really good, and go and develop the relationship, and actually, they're people. Now, you need to generate FOMO, and then you can go out and meet a lot more people, and then there can be chatter in the once you're through that barrier. But I think that people don't get this idea that like, look, there are correct investors for different businesses. Like, if you're in deep tech, like there are some really good investors that would make a lot of sense for you. Like, there's a lot that don't. I would say that the other thing for me that I really like today that wasn't there when I was raising capital at an early stage is I think solo GPs can be like a huge win for founders. Like, I think that the brand name is great, and if you look at the Chainalysis cap table, it's full of brand names, and and they're great, and they're very helpful for bringing in some talent. But I think at the very, very early stages, I think that there are some solo GPs who have an advantage to be close to the founders, a real partner to founders, and really care about their portfolio and how they're doing. And I think that a lot of them have now raised, decent amounts of capital to be able to finance significant companies. And I think that that is a new trend that I think founders should be paying a lot of attention to if they're not. And there's a vanity that comes with fundraising where you feel like you should go to Oxford or Cambridge or, the equivalent of the VC world. And I think that that's relevant, but like in the same way that I think that there can be a 2-stage rocket, which is my academic trajectory, the same thing applies in venture. So I think that like raising your first round of capital from a good solo GP is like a fantastic, because they're going to bat for you. They're going to go bat for you. You're gonna have a real partner in the business, and if you can connect with them on their because they also have to carve out like a very specific niche. So if you're in that zone and it really works for that solo GP, you'll get like a ton of support for them at the very, very early stages of the company, and then you can like parlay that into like a larger round of funding. And they all are not every solo GP, but I also find that like VCs who put their own name on their fund care about it and can manage their fund in a different way than.
That's why everybody wants money from Andreessen Horowitz.
Yeah. No, exactly. And look, Andreessen Horowitz is a fantastic VC firm, and like I think that there's also like if you can raise a seed round from Andreessen Horowitz, like, and there's a partner there that connects with you on your business, like fantastic. But there'll often be businesses that need a bit more nurturing before you get to that point. And I think having this ecosystem of solo GPs is actually like a really nice new way of getting to that point.
What has been the role of mentors or a personal advisory board in your life? Or do you have one? Yeah, I think that they come and go for me a little bit, and there are people that I admire greatly that I am fortunate enough to spend time with. I used it a lot when I was making big decisions. I don't tend to use it like on a weekly basis. Like that's not my style. I tend to use it extensively when I have something very, very large on my mind, whether that's an acquisition or transitioning into the CEO role. I phoned up several like mentors of mine,
I was lucky enough to chat with Dave from MongoDB, who I just have like enormous amounts of respect for. And I think that having some of those people in your life are really, important, and people will make time. I think that, again, I don't use it on like too much of a regular basis, but I think when you've got something big on your mind and want to talk through the logic of it, it's a really helpful thing to have. I've experimented with coaching too, and sometimes I'm in coaching, sometimes I'm not in coaching. There's roles for it at certain times as well. But I think it's important to cultivate, and it's important to ask for it. I think that, just to tell a funny story, but like my connection with Dave from MongoDB was not through like a venture capitalist. Like Dave spoke at this battery conference in New York, and I was the only person there in shorts, and I like ran through the streets like a madman after him and said like how much I like really enjoyed the things that he said. And he said like, drop me an email and come and have a coffee with me. And like that's something that I think entrepreneurs should be doing, is that, taking those shots and making that happen for themselves. And I think that, it's nice if your VCs can help you with some of those things, but if they can't, you should be doing it.
How long ago was this conference where you met him?
Way before COVID. So I want to say like Cloud NYC, probably 2019. So maybe six years ago.
Halfway into the company's journey.
Yeah. And I think that when you think about it, it's nice to also have like differing perspectives and people who've known you for longer too. So I think that one of the hard parts about being an entrepreneur and being a co-founder of a high growth company is that you can also become untethered from like who you started the business as. And I think that it's really important to have people in your life who see you through the full journey. And I think that, Jenny Fielding is like a good example of my MD from Techstars when we were like running around, like not knowing what we were doing. And, she's someone who I like keep in frequent contact with and can help me more on the emotional side of like, grounding and like where I am, and, make sure that like I'm still the same person that I was. And
the reminder of how far you've come, right?
Yeah. Also very nice in that regard. And I think that is important. I think that one of my realizations as CEO is that it does become more lonely. Like I thought being a co-founder was quite lonely, and
that's the most common thing I hear.
I think that the loneliness is not like look, I'm very fortunate. Like I have friends in my life that are like very long-standing friends that I continue to spend time with. But I think that the difficult part is like you have this big, like especially for me at the moment, is like I have this like big group of people and like this big responsibility which takes up an enormous amount of emotional capacity. And even as superhuman as you want to be, like each human has finite emotional capacity. And I think that it's important to be cognizant of that and continue to look at things outside of work as also contributing to your success.
What are your favorite books of all time?
It's interesting. I haven't done a ton of reading over the last 10 years, I would say. Like I have and I'll get to sort of some of my better books, but I think that my consumption of information and the intensity of what I have been doing has made it more difficult to sit down and like read books as a medium. I read an enormous amount before an entrepreneurial journey, and still enjoy reading to some extent, but I end up today reading for mostly business than pleasure. And that just comes from like the makeup of my weekly existence and how much information I consume. So like I consume like an enormous amount of information a week. I don't even watch TV really, and if I have time, I like to cook and I like to cycle, and so I'm doing things that are like very much outside of, I mean, I can name some cookbooks that I've read over the last 10 years, but
What's your favorite cuisine?
I'm like very like Mediterranean, Middle Eastern inspired, and yeah,
How much you cook as well?
yeah, I cook a lot of that as well. But I think
the best thing you cook?
the best thing I cook, I mean, probably is sort of Ottolenghi style. Ottolenghi is a chef in London. He's done like a lot of different restaurants, but like it's very herbaceous, sort of salmon and like rice dishes with berries and nuts and like herbs. And I think that most of the stuff that I cook is not on recipe, but is sort of a combination of those things. I also, being a South African, I like to stand on the barbecue and cook a lot of different things. And I can barbecue fish, I can barbecue chicken, and everything else. And I really enjoy that. And I would say that I also host dinners and I cook for people, and I try and cook for any founder that we buy their company. I try and I invite them in and like tell them who I am as a human being, and I think that that's an important part of a journey. And I think that that's a lot of what gives me joy outside work. When it comes to books, I really again I've been reading mostly business books over the last 10 years, and I think that my favorites would be I think I've read Jeffrey Moore Into the Tornado, which is not that common for people to read, which is, there's a book that everyone reads, or they don't read, but they have internalized, called Crossing the Chasm, which is all about like how you get that first set of users to adopt, and how do you cross from the early adopters into the early majority. Like that's the big chasm that everyone falls in, is that you can get like a lot of early people interested in your technology, and then how do you cross over into like a more early majority context. Into the Tornado is like, how does it work? What does your strategy need to look like when you go from the early majority to the mainstream? And that's just a fascinating read on the difference in strategy and the difference in approach, where you go from like successful company to like actually like iconic. And that's something that I think is really, really an interesting like piece of work that gets overlooked.
You mentioned you consume a lot of information these days because of the nature of your job. What are your top sources of information?
Today, I would say that the biggest source of information inside of work is, I get like a lot of reporting. I look at a lot of data about what is happening inside the company. I look at roadmaps. I run product and engineering today, so I get like a lot of. I have to go through like PRDs and other things that is the information that I consume. I also spend a decent amount of my time with customers, and I'm consuming information in those settings a lot. But my outside of like my actual like sort of news sourcing is largely still on Twitter or X today, and then increasingly like I spend time talking to Grok, and I largely talk to Grok or ChatGPT about hypotheses that I have, and it is incredibly good at helping refine a hypothesis. Like not asking what the hypothesis should be about something, but like
validate your assumptions.
Yeah,
right.
Like a good example is, and people are going to be horrified by these examples, but equity strategy at a company is one of the most least talked about like aspects of company building, but is the large, like if you think about it in dollar terms, it's the largest form of investment that a company makes.
What do you mean by that?
So like how you distribute equity to your employees, how you think about like dilution, how do you think about refreshes, how do you think about how you compensate your people? If you think about it, it is literally the biggest use of company resource out of any of the things that you touch. And if you go look through like any book, any like blog,
It's not discussed.
It's not discussed at all. Like there is like a market survey about what is market. And when you really get into it, you actually as a leader need to form your philosophy about how you do that and what financial implications it has for your business. That is not something that is discussed, and it's very hard to like find a podcast about it.
Garda has data on it, but not how you should do it.
Right. Yeah. And so this is where it's an interesting problem where you don't want Grok designing, like you don't want to ask the open-ended question of like, hey, can you design my equity strategy over the next 3 years? But actually, like if you start with a hypothesis and you start with an idea, like Grok can help you, or ChatGPT or whatever model you want to talk to, can actually help you like formulate like a more coherent philosophy about something. And I think that, you know, that's an enormously valuable thing that I wish I had 10 years ago, that helps me in sort of how I develop different hypotheses and and then I go and talk to the teams and people about it. But it helps me by myself refine.
This is the first I've heard. So thank you for sharing that example.
Yeah.
You mentioned that you're from South Africa and your parents immigrated. And there seems to be this network of South African entrepreneurs. Is there a secret club that I should know of?
Yeah, I think that it's an interesting thing about like, are there examples that people look up to? I think that it's really about like who's around influencing you. Like, I think it's much more of a like social thing where all of us grew up and there are very successful South African entrepreneurs, and I was like, you know, this is pre-Elon, but like in my lifetime, but there were lots of examples of it. And I think maybe if you go deeper into it, there was just so much opportunity in the transition post-apartheid, and but there was also like a lot of natural resources, and the economy like grew, you know, massively over, you know, post-Second World War. And so there was all this opportunity. And so then they become these examples of, you know, great business people. And I think that then inspires the younger generation to be entrepreneurial. And so, yeah, I think that I'm still looking at, you know, big companies to come out of South Africa today. But you know, we're yet to see like a major breakout tech company coming from
out of South Africa. Yeah, but the expats that are building those companies, it's like that list is pretty long.
Yeah, but I think that the interesting thing and the sort of slightly sad bit of news is that the biggest tech companies that may come out of Nigeria or Kenya may eclipse South Africa.
Oh yeah, that's probably true. Yeah. We'll end with that. Jonathan, thank you so much.
Yeah.
It was a pleasure having you on.